So what made you want to pick this as a topic and vocalise on it?
I wanted to talk about this self-harm because I don't think it's talked about enough. I'm tired of not talking about it myself fully. And I just want to combat the amount of shame that is attached to those conversations. And I guess part of me doesn't understand how we've come a long way in terms of talking about suicide. We're not anywhere close to a place of comfort talking about self-harm. And that sort of difference, it just doesn't seem right. It seems just odd that we can talk about one more freely now, not the other.
Do you think it's more prevalent than perhaps people know? And why do you think that is, though?
I'm not sure. I think it's something that is people protect themselves from because they're scared of engaging with it at all. So they'd rather not uncover anything. Which unfortunately means a lot of people don't understand it to the point where they can have conversations.
Yeah.
So it just ends up being this sort of vague thing that people are aware of but no one really understands, which then doesn't help anyone else from talking about it openly.
Well, it's hard to, because as you know, I'm heavily involved in the metal scene, events and stuff like that, and I know so many people. And in my experience, it's not like the action of things like self-harming and cutting themselves. It's often done it's not done for attention or for anybody else to see invisibly. It's not often like a cry for help, or at least that's my outside perspective of it. And then there's this spectrum of how some people will wear them, the scars, you've got them for life. Some people will tattoo over them. Some people will still have them out and show, like wearing shorts or something, if your legs or your arms. But it's almost like you've accepted and you've, I guess, come to terms with it, and you're happy. It's not like wearing it like a badge of honor, but it's like you can't turn away or forget why or the reasons. So I see it, but then it's not one of those things so you can be like, oh, so it's not a topic you can necessarily bring up because you don't know the reasons and the rationales behind it.
I agree with a lot of that, but I think a lot of people that have visible scars and are not afraid for them to be visible don't necessarily mind people asking about it in the same way that someone would ask about a tattoo. But it's just how you approach it. Because I think it's still something which is so taboo. People don't know how to ask because they feel like it's inappropriate.
Yeah.
But if someone has visible scars, then they are probably expecting people to even, not necessarily to ask, but to notice them.
Yeah.
Because
it's an invitation too.
Yeah.
I think, those that can't relate to it or don't understand, it's not seen or perceived as an invitation to.
Sure.
It's almost kind of like the social norm is to not, and just, acts as if it hasn't been seen, noticed or mentioned. But so is this a topic that is personally very close to yourself?
Yeah, it is. I previously have harmed myself. It's something I've not done for a lot of years, but there was just a period of time where it just became, it was a relatively short period of time, but I think it became quite intense throughout that period. And it was at a time when I didn't even really know, I didn't have any sort of vocabulary surrounding mental health as a whole. And mental health wasn't something which was widely talked about as it is now. One, I didn't know I was struggling at all. And then I didn't really know what was happening and why I chose to then hurt myself until much later on.
So how did you come to, so I don't want to kind of pry too much, but what journey did you go on to then the first time you did? and what was almost, I guess, that sense or that feeling you were looking to try and achieve out of it?
I think I was trying to just escape the intensity of how I was feeling at the time. I don't remember looking for like loads of different avenues of supporting myself, but I didn't know that that was a thing you could do. So it somehow just ended up with this almost like a craving to get something out of my body, pain. And I was already aware that self-harm was a thing, but it was always framed as something that young girls do. So I think it was just my body's way of just trying to tell me that something was wrong, but in this case it was just a very unhealthy, slightly volatile way of doing that. I remember essentially like trying to choose which part of my body I would like hurt. And weirdly, it was like, well, which bit is going to give me the least amount of pain? But then it just became more intense. So like the reason I then continued to do it was because it gave me an enormous sense of relief from the things I was feeling. It was almost like I could physically feel anxiety and being incredibly upset like building in my body, and then the act of harming myself then physically was then being released from my body. Like it was that sort of, I was that involved with how it felt.
So it almost becomes like habitual as well, though, right?
Yeah, because then it was just like, well, that's what I do.
Yeah.
If I feel this again, then I know that will work. So therefore, and as I said a second ago, I didn't know what else there was to do. Like I had no other support structures or mechanisms in place to deal with those feelings, because in part I didn't know what those feelings were either. So I was just like, there's all this horrible stuff happening in my body and in my head, and I don't know what to do. And then I suddenly found something that provided relief, and was like, well, I'll do that.
Did you speak to your friends or your family about it, or did you like tend to? It was deeply personal and hidden, and
yeah, I hid it away. I remember eventually going to a doctor, and then they sent me to a psychiatrist. But they, in my perception of their questions, the psychiatrist or counsellor, they were really hung up on like the why, as in why did you choose to harm yourself, as opposed to the why of what's going on, which really put me off, and I didn't go back. But also a friend / friend of a friend noticed some scars, and then very delicately had a conversation with one of my close friends, who then spoke to me privately about it. And then that's the only time that I kind of started to speak about it. But we were all kind of in the same boat. Like no one really knew what to do. And I certainly didn't expect anyone else to be like, okay, let's not do that because you can do all these things or support me in that way. We were all just kind of completely clueless as what self-harm was really, and that it was bad and or not a healthy expression of pain. And so therefore no one really knew how to support me in that capacity either.
When you were doing it, was like, I don't want to say did you research, but like you look into stuff, and do you like then converse with other people that were going through similar things and using that as a sense of relief or expression for the things you were going through?
Not at all. I didn't speak to anyone else about it in terms of, or I didn't seek anyone who was going through similar things. Again, I think I was so like ignorant to it happening maybe to people like me and to people and for like the the context to be the same.
Mm.
That I think I was blinded by how I felt, so I kind of just shut down and shut everything else out.
Mm.
Yeah, so no, I didn't seek that kind of community, for want of a better word.
Mm.
I know I said previously I was aware of self-harm being a thing, but
Yeah.
that didn't then lead to me finding other people that had done it or were doing it.
So how did it make you feel when your friend approached you? Like when it had been noticed, you said it was delicately, and so when it's somebody close and trusted to you. But yeah, how does that land when like you're not doing it extrovertedly, shall we say?
Mm.
You know, when somebody comes to you and says, "I'm genuinely, worried or concerned." Yeah. How did that land?
I think I was initially just a bit shocked that anyone had noticed.
Mm.
But it was tricky because the people that were closest to me at the time, emotionally, it was kind of linked to them as well.
Mm.
So the reason that I was getting so upset about certain things was because of my perception of how they were like behaving around me.
Mm.
If that makes sense.
So
it was kind of almost kind of bittersweet
Mm.
because I liked that someone suddenly, was interested in me in that capacity, as in cared about me.
Mm.
But they also, not that they knew at the time, they were part of the dialogue in my head, which was causing me to become so upset.
Mm-hmm.
So it was tricky, but essentially them having that conversation with me and them knowing, then eventually led me to not do it, because I think I then felt, one, embarrassed, and it was one of those things where when one person found out, lots of other people found out. So it was a bit like I was suddenly on show.
Right.
And that was just like, that was gross to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it was just someone showing me care was enough for me to kind of like flick a switch to be like, okay, maybe I need to not do this. I don't know what else I'm going to do, but maybe this is not the right path. Yeah, and it ultimately still ended up being the whole like context of how I was feeling, why I was feeling that, and then the actions I took, harming myself, still largely remained unspoken about until much later on.
Right.
But in that moment, it did mean I stopped the harmful behaviour on myself.
Have you spoken to other people that have gone through a similar journey? Because like you say about it's not vocalised and it's almost that taboo kind of side of things, and part of what you're trying to do is make it a more open, honest conversation. Have you spoken to others that have gone through that? As
only maybe a couple of people, and one person in particular has very visible scars, and they are quite happy to talk about it because it's something they sometimes still do, and it's a behaviour that they sometimes lean on, but they're not ashamed of it. They'd rather not do it, but it's currently one of their coping mechanisms for some like fairly acute mental health issues. And then the other people I've spoken about it to, it's only ever been, that's something I've also done. And then it hasn't really gone anywhere else.
Depth.
Yeah.
So what do you see as an outside observer in the world then? Because I think like you're right about your view that perhaps people outward looking in think, oh, it's just for teenage girls going through, eating disorders or this, that, the other, and but in your kind of view and experience, do you think it's more broadly prevalent?
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those things where when you start pairing a behaviour to a demographic, then it's really hard for the public like the majority to see outside of that
because
they just attach themselves to that idea. I'm not doubting it was at one time more prevalent in younger girls for whatever reason, but it's almost like when everyone was talking about it then and about how it would only affect younger girls, it's like no one else existed.
Yeah.
And there was no doubt people who are not women who were doing it alongside that narrative, who were then just kind of like, but they're not suddenly going to be like, oh, me too.
Yeah.
So they probably felt like they then couldn't talk about it because the assumption is...
Yeah, it's not for you.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. And I guess for some people, if a behaviour is attached to a certain group of people and you don't want to be associated with that group of people for whatever reason, then again, you're not going to talk about it. You're not going to be open because you don't want to have that association.
So you mentioned about the topic of suicide as well. Like, do you? Again, everything's opinion, right? So we don't have these conversations to try and provide solutions or anything. That's the beauty of it. It's just like trying to sit down and understand. Yeah, because like I've got my own views on. I went through a lot of things when I was younger that I still find difficult to talk about. And one of my outlets, which I can kind of on parity relate to, is my background was extreme sports. And a big part of that was the amount that I hurt myself. So it wasn't all about, oh, I'm going to grind this and I'm going to do this and it's amazing. Actually, a lot of it genuinely was trying to find that expression and outlet to get something that you couldn't even rationalize inside you out. And it was often through pain and bruises. I was bruised badly, not necessarily consciously, deliberately, but when I look back on some of the behaviours that I do, I can kind of relate to. But you mentioned about the conversation and topic around suicide. Do you think they are not mutually exclusive, but they are connected in a way, but maybe not necessarily talked about because we always gravitate towards the extreme and the outcome, rather like you say, it's about what's going on now. There's
lots of different levels to it, because I think, generally speaking, we still live in a society where we want to help people once they reach like their crisis point. But then
it's A&E, not first aid, isn't it?
Yeah, totally, yeah. But then what's to say someone harming herself isn't a crisis point? I guess the way, in my head, I sort of pair them together is because of how, I think because of the amount of sort of shame surrounding both self-harm and suicide, it should really be about the individual who is maybe having suicidal ideation or is harming themselves, but it inevitably becomes about the people around you and their perception of it, and that being somehow more important than the person that needs support, which is where things get really like complicated in terms of actually then providing support.
From an outside perspective, there's obviously way more conversation and vocality around suicide, but that's because it has a finite kind of end to it without putting too fine a point on it, and then people can kind of come to some kind of level of closure with it, I guess, because it's literally the end of something, and yet it's somebody who's been driven to an extreme action, but all of the residual side of things is what you leave those around you with and dealing with, and a lot of it is either there's no clarity, there's no real understanding because the conversations haven't been had, whereas then with the self-harm topic, it's an ongoing thing, and then at least in my experience, again, is then you either don't talk about it, you don't bring it up because you don't know how to bridge that subject. So same when someone goes, "Are you all right?" It's like, are you prepared for the answer of going, do you know what, actually, quite frankly, I'm really not. Like, it's like, it's almost like a cursory thing. But then also what I tend to find then is then you've got the other side of the spectrum, which is then people are trying to find a solution for it. And what's the answer to that? I don't think there is one.
Yeah.
So it can be a difficult conversation for people to be able to have because it's an ongoing thing. Whereas then with suicide, it's kind of, you come to terms and it's kind of, it's a little bit more finite. So Are you seeing others more openly talk about it, or do you genuinely think it's still very much under the radar and taboo?
There are definitely more people and organisations that talk about self-harm, but it feels like so heavily policed. Because I think a lot of the time, and I think again, this also comes back into self-harm and suicide, there's still that opinion where if you talk about it, then you're encouraging people to do it. Because if someone doesn't know about something, then they're not going to pursue it. But like, just because we're talking about self-harm and suicide doesn't mean that someone is automatically going to be like, well, I'm going to do that now. That's still a big reason why it's not talked about very much, because people are scared it's going to create this sort of pandemic of people then choosing that approach to healing, the opposite of that.
Now you look back on it though, but like, do you see it as a healing journey? Because like you said, when you were, I don't know, maybe say confronted, but like it was brought to you, obviously the people around you are going to be contributing factors to it, but that sense of acknowledgement and visibility, it's not like overnight that switch stops and it's like, okay, great, maybe I'm going to make a conscious decision. This ain't the thing I'm going to do now. What was that journey and change of behaviour for you? Because it's physical and mental. So yeah, surely it wasn't overnight. It was, a longer term journey. Like you wean yourself off.
yeah, totally. I mean, it was a very long journey. I think I stopped like actually harming myself relatively quickly. But it doesn't mean I still had the temptation to do it for a long time. And as I said, like, I didn't really know anything about sort of mental health as a whole. So I think it then automatically became part of my own narrative into understanding what mental health is and understanding what outlets I have to talk about it, which for me has always been like the more creative side of things and art and all that kind of stuff, and actually like acknowledging that the things that I say create are actually relevant to what's going on in my head, which then helped me to learn just about the mind and what mental illness looks like and what mental wellness looks like as well, because you need to know what both look like in order to actually properly heal. And then it was just me pursuing that after coming to the realization that I wasn't well, or that there was just something going on that needed to be addressed, which is essentially what my body was trying to tell me when I was actually harming myself, that something was wrong and something needed to change. It's just the vocabulary it used was that of harm and not of words or art.
Yeah. So looking back on it, and like your headspace back then, would you have like seeked answers to any of the questions in that kind of way? Because like what we're trying to do is like you wanted to talk about a particular subject, so just the beauty of it is we can sit and talk openly about a sensitive subject. That's pretty much what MANUP stands for, right? It's trying to just normalise conversations about slightly awkward things. But looking back on it, do you feel like what kind of things would you have felt would have been beneficial? Just like people more openly talking about it, not from a positive, like you say, it's not about like giving it a good PR exercise.
Sure.
This is definitely you should be doing it this way. But the resources available, the topics of the conversation to be able to help understand not truly understand. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like, do you know what I mean? What would you have liked to have seen more?
Yeah. The reality of the situation I found myself in at that time was that, mental health wasn't being talked about at all. I think if it was now, it would be very different because there is so much more in the way of resources available. But I think that would have helped a lot, just knowing that there are resources out there, organisations that you can actually go to. But also, like, safety is a really big thing, like feeling safe amongst your friends or whoever you hang out with, and like trying to foster an environment that encourages you to talk about how you're feeling without it feeling like heavy.
Yeah.
And like it just being like a normal conversation.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you don't feel safe with the people you're in, you're not going to talk about anything. And then if that is not supported then by the general sort of society or environment you're in either, then that's another barrier to being honest with yourself and with other people as well. So I think I just needed more understanding of mental health as a whole, knowing that there were resources available to me, because even at that time they were just really hard to find, and not feeling as if what I was saying whenever I did talk about it was like this big, huge thing which was uncertain and completely out of anyone's sort of comfort zone. If that makes sense.
It does. Well, it will make sense to somebody, and that's the beauty of the conversations, isn't it? It's what I like about what MANUP does in videos is that there's probably somebody somewhere that will watch it and go, I can relate. There's some kind of sense of catharsis in it, because it's not about providing solutions, but it's about purely by sat talking about it, and it's an educational journey. I'm learning from you, Ben. So it's like, that's the beauty of it. It's